Hello, hello, it's Brian once again with Tavarin Games and another update on Littlevale. So I wasn't able to get as much done on Littlevale over the last couple weeks as I would have liked. I had Canadian Thanksgiving and got busy during that. And then this last week my computer's CPU decided to die, so I had to get a new CPU and motherboard and get that rebuilt. So I did lose a few days of working on the game, but I was able to get some things done. So the first thing was getting Hector into the game. So if you remember from the previous video, I had showed off his sprite art and his character portrait. So he is in the game. Now he needed a house, so I put together this little house here. I decided to put it right next to the salon and the clothing store, where he will work at the salon, and his sister, who's going to be in the other room and live with him, is going to work in the clothing store. So he's in the game. And then one thing I was doing when I was working on writing his dialogue is I realized that the dialogue paths and dialogue trees, the way I was coding it, were very rigid. And I'll show you with some of the characters that still have the old style of dialogue. You have it here where I was using a bunch of separate lists to store all the dialogue, which was a mistake to begin with, and I have been now working on fixing. But the other thing was you had so the lead-in, which was what your character says to get this response from the NPC, and then the various NPC responses to this that you can say. And I had to specify the exact responses I wanted to use, because if we go to the NPC dialogue, the way I was getting the responses, where is it? It was basically just grabbing those and then grabbing the messages associated with that particular number. So it was very, very rigid. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to go through all the dialogue and grab a couple random ones that you could then say that are conversation starters. So if you say, you ask what about Littlevale, I would have like one set response that would be specified, and then it would grab a couple more responses for you to say. So that way the conversation doesn't always play out the exact same way for everybody. Now, in order to do that, I was basically going to have to add in a variable that tracked for all of these dialogue options, which are ones that can actually be grabbed, which are the ones that start a topic tree. Because if it's something that's a response to something else, then it might get confusing, like, wait, where does this even lead in if that accidentally gets picked? So with Hector, I decided to do him first since I was working on him. I don't have the script open. One second. So if we go over to the scripts, I believe it's actually here. I made this new dialogue class of object, which has all of those original things that were being stored in separate lists. But now I'm actually doing it the right way of having a class of object that I can then just store all the dialogue as. So you have the lead-in thing that you say, the dialogue that the NPC says, the set responses that have to be grabbed after this, so that allows for a topic to continue. The alternate text, so that's basically if you've already spoken to this line of dialogue with somebody, they'll say something else. They remember that you said it, so they might come back and be like, wait, didn't I already tell you this? And then repeat themselves or something. As well as the icon it's going to grab, so this would let you have different moods in the game. Now, so this starter is actually tracking which of the dialogue options led to, which of the first dialogues led to this particular response. So this way, I also don't grab, like, if you start a conversation where it's like, how'd you come to Littlevale? And there's a few different responses, and you can talk through a few things. This way, when it's grabbing the random dialogue, it knows, okay, don't grab this one again, because that'll just restart the tree. And then I decided to also add in this relation variable, which is how much does this particular dialogue option change your relation. Previously, with the old dialogue, I was making it so that anytime you hit a new piece of dialogue, it just added 1 to your relationship. But I figured that was a bit too limiting, so now each dialogue option has its own relation level. So certain things might actually offend an NPC, or might make them extra happy, and so I can play with that with the relationship value. This threshold here is determining can this dialogue be spoken at your current relationship level. So let's say you set this to 50, you need then a relationship minimum of 50 before this dialogue option becomes visible to the player. And then finally, selectable, which was actually the new variable I talked about I need, of is this one of the dialogue options that can be selected by the response script in order to start a conversation. So with all of these new variables to play with, and this much easier to deal with dialogue, I got to writing Hector's dialogue, which is right here. So I ended up he talks a lot. I ended up writing a bunch of dialogue. So the first 5 things are standard things that everyone has to state. So it is the first introduction when you very first meet them, so what they say to you. There's no lead-in for this, since this is the very first time you talk to them, it just shows this. Like, you don't say anything to them first, you respond. And then in the response, you see, I now only have to specify one particular response. We also have the regular hello when you're first getting to know them, when your relationship's still low. It's this one. I haven't actually added in higher level of relationship hellos or anything, but that would get more familiar. But that is the plan of, as you get to know somebody, the way they say hello to you will be more familiar and friendlier. And then your response to the introduction is the third one. So typically you say, it's nice to meet you back. They say their response to that. Hector's a little funny about it. And then we go in, so this then leads into how are you, which is standard dialogue. And then, of course, we have in number 3, the standard goodbye. So this is just, you say goodbye to them. This is what they respond. And then finally, when you stink, this is what they say to you and they refuse to speak. Now, in order to then after that, we've got a whole bunch of new dialogues you can see. So we have these ones that are not selectable, these ones that are false. But here's one that would be selectable, asking where he works. And that's selectable, and then it's got responses that lead into this little tree. So in order to actually take advantage of this, I had to write a few new scripts into the NPC dialogue script. So initially, my start conversation script, it's just grabbing the hygiene needs, seeing if it's high enough, and if not, it's like, yeah, no, we're gonna subtract from your relationship and grab the you stink one. So that's pretty similar. I had to change which one it's grabbing. So the you stink is now the 4th dialogue option for everybody. I wanted them, sort of the standard ones to be up at the top. And also, it doesn't need to subtract a hygiene variable from it because the amount it affects relationship is now actually stored with that piece of dialogue. The other thing, though, is if it's the first time you've talked to the NPC for the day, it does add extra to your relationship. So that's still the same. Then if we're going into the getting answers or the original getting an answer. So this is when you plug in the response, this is basically grabbing what does the NPC say to what you're saying. And so originally it was just adding, so you can see here, if you have never said this to them before, it adds the NPC relationship value. So the thing I had to change was pretty quickly of just adding instead for the dialogue, the relation value associated with each piece of dialogue. Now, in the case that you stink, though, it doesn't matter if you've spoken before or not. It will still subtract that relationship value. If you keep trying to talk to somebody while you're filthy, they're really not going to like you. It's going to go down. I also had to add in this variable because now we're subtracting possibly more from the relationship. It might dip below 0, and that was causing a whole host of problems and bugs. So I just also check at this point after we've added or removed any relationship values, make sure it's still 0 or higher, otherwise it's going to cause some serious problems. Now the other thing I wanted to add is for certain dialogue options that the NPC doesn't like, so one that Hector doesn't like, you can see it has -10 for the relationship value here. He really doesn't like if you say this to him. I wanted it so that the NPC would remember that and be mad at you. So in this case, when you say this to him, he ends the conversation. There is no response. He walks away. If you talk to him again, I was like, okay, but as soon as you talk to him again, he's just going to be like, oh, hello, and it's going to go back to normal. I didn't want that to be the case. So I added in a mad variable. If the NPC's mad, what the script will do, so if we go into his dialogue script and it's checking this, it's saying, okay, if he's mad, instead load this other piece of dialogue. So in the case of Hector, I had to write it in as dialogue option 26 because I didn't want to re-index everything, where they're going to basically still be mad at you. And if you want to keep talking to them, you have to apologize. Otherwise, you just say goodbye and they stay mad. If you do apologize, it then checks that you did apologize. So if you're mad and you say something to them that has a positive relation value, so when you say the standard goodbye, it doesn't change the relationship at all. The standard goodbye, which is the only other option you're allowed when the character is mad, doesn't change the relationship. So the person will, or NPC, will still be mad. Whereas here, this one, when apologizing, will add to the relationship, which will then allow them over here. So if they're mad, but the dialogue relationship is positive, they will forgive you. I have a little debug here just to make sure that works. Actually, we can delete that since it does work. And then it turns off the fact they're mad, and you can go back to normal. Hooray. So I thought that was sort of an interesting way, and something I can play around with the different NPCs, and maybe have it so that if you make them really happy, then the next time you talk to them, they're going to like have an extra happy hello. Stuff like that. So I'm going to be able to play around with it by setting relationship thresholds when checking things to then check if their mood changes, and then change the responses as or their answers that they give you to suit that. So the other big thing, as I said, was for the responses before, it was just grab this list and just split it up, and there's the responses that are displayed for the player to choose from. And yeah, as you can see, every single one I had to specify, and it was getting really hard to keep track, and I only had like 10 dialogue options for each character. As soon as I was going to be adding more, it's like, how do I map these together and branch them? So I needed to write this new get responses script. So it checks, is there a response? So that's a big thing, is this message string, which is grabbing the responses. If that is blank, it just ends the conversation. So that's how I have conversations end in this game, is there is no response value specified. So if you look at the goodbye, no response value. If you look at the you stink, no response value. Those end conversations. So that's the thing, is also as I'm writing these dialogue, it is a bit of a limitation on myself because I have to go through and make sure that there is always a response. So for like little dialogue trees, if we find the start of one here, the way I've been doing it is tending to have two responses that then can just link back to each other. So say this one goes to 18, 19. So if you look at 18 and 19, those continue on to different things, and eventually they loop back to the start. So all the little mini conversations are kind of cyclical, which makes it a little tricky to write, but then makes it so that there's always flow to the conversation. It doesn't just end on you. I know I'm being fairly ambitious and trying to make all of this crazy dialogue for each NPC, and I plan on a lot of NPCs, so there's going to be a lot of writing to do. Okay, so then it sees, how many are there? Okay, if we are not at the introduction, so the very first line only has one response, we don't want to grab more. And if the character's not mad, we then say, okay, we then are going to want to grab a few more options to fill it out so that there are 3 options total that the player can choose from. So, if we look at that, so it has the list of the starter options. So it's gone through, like when it loads, the character goes through and grabs all the ones where the selectable is true. So it goes through that with this while loop, checking, is the count of options less than 3? So it's going in, it's checking, is this is the current dialogue option part of the same tree as the starter? If so, we don't want to select it because, again, that would just cause you to be looping through the same conversation over and over again. And then it checks to make sure that you have a relationship value high enough to actually see that dialogue. I haven't written any dialogue that's above a relationship value of 0 required, but at some point I will, and that's going to really build into being able to build relationships, ask people to go out on dates, eventually get married and stuff in the game. Now that is still a ways away, but this one simple line of script here will let me play and utilize that. And then it checks, is it one of the options that's already been selected? Because it's using a random value to select it. So it's like, is this already in the list? If it is, ignore it. If not, then add this to the list and keep doing that until you've got 3 options. It then adds on the goodbye, which is option number 3 now as the standard. It was just being annoyed because the list I'm storing it as a string and it did not like having an integer added in. So that's why these little quotation marks are here. That was a quick way to fix that. And then it displays those options. So it grabs in the sprite for the A, W, S, or D key, depending on which one of the options it's at, and then shows the actual lead-in value, and then adds a line break. And boom. So we have all this new way of interacting with the dialogue. So if we go into the game, so it's going to load because we made a little change there. This will just take a second. So we can play the game. Now, Hector is the only one that I've actually initialized the new dialogue options with. I've been writing it for the other characters and working my way through that. But Hector's the only one where the script actually goes, grab the new dialogue options instead of the old ones. I want to get everyone else written in before I transfer the game over to everyone, instead of trying to transfer it one at a time. But yeah, let's talk to Hector here. So there he is. We can chat with him, and so you can see we've got, for the introduction, you have just one response. You can always say nice to meet you. You have to be polite at the start. Sorry, that's the way I want this game to be. And then you have all these different dialogue options. So if we ask how he is, he says his thing. And then you've got, the question it leads to, like, what are you talking about? So he'll explain. He talks quite a bit. And now the one he doesn't like, so this is just a conversation ender. If you say, forget I asked, he gets a little bit mad, and he's got now a little bit of a mad face. And he just walks away. So to show off the mad thing, if we talk to him again, there we go. So instead of saying hello, he still says that he's still mad at you. So you can just say goodbye or apologize. So let's apologize to him. So there we go. We've apologized, and then we go back into the standard. So you can see these ones are also changing. So we can ask him what there is to do in town. He's got a huge, long response. We don't need to read that right now. But then that leads into asking him about those things you talked about, the theater, the pub. But then there's your another random option. So you can instead change the topic and just ask how he came to Littlevale. But yeah, so we have that. So that seems to all be working really nicely. So as I said, he's the only one in the game where the new dialogue's been initialized. But if we go to code, I have written the dialogue for 5 of the characters under the new style. So Brad, you can see I've written up a bunch of the new dialogue and the things. So here's his old dialogue and all of his new stuff above it. So the old dialogue is going to stay in the script until I transfer everybody over. So I've done Brad, I've done Alec, I've done Derek, and Belle. They all have new dialogue. So, we can look at Alex. Here's his. Whole bunch of new dialogue, all that. So they'll be ready. I have 5 more characters that are in the game where I haven't done the new dialogue yet, so I want to get theirs all written up, and then I will transition the game over entirely to all the new dialogue, and just delete the old dialogue, since all the old dialogue has been incorporated into the new stuff, and then I've just been adding on to that. So on the art side as well, so as you saw a little hint there, for the character portraits, I wanted different moods. So each character portrait, if we go here, had sort of the default one, but then I wanted that. So one mood is if they're grossed out. You can see I give him a wrinkly nose, and he looks a little unhappy. So this is if you talk to him when you stink, they get grossed out. This is they have an extra happy face, where if you say something really nice that they like, they'll go extra happy. A mad face, and finally a sad face if they're talking about something sad. So I've done that for Alec. We've got Belle, so her normal face, her grossed out face, where she's kind of sniffing the air and not happy, her very happy face, her mad face, which I must admit is very mad, and her sad face. And then same thing, Brad, so normal, grossed out, happy, mad, and sad. And then I got Derek's done. So we have normal Derek, grossed out Derek, happy Derek. He's really happy. I did a good job, I think, with that. Mad Derek, and finally sad Derek. So each of those characters has that. Now, and then Hector, of course, who is the new guy. So Hector's extra happy, Hector's grossed out face, his normal face, his mad face, and his sad face. So I still have to do Jenny, Marie, Maurice, Sandra, Wanda, and Wilbur. I need to get all them done. Also, I might edit some of these up. You can see some of the really old art style I did. So Maurice was the first one I did. And that style really does not match the others, so I might redo him a little bit just to make him look a little more realistic and less cartoony. Whereas, and Brad and Derek were done early on, so their art is still kind of in this older style while I was still figuring it out. Whereas you've got Hector, Jenny, and Belle. I've gone a little more realistic, or at least tried to. And their characters, and so I gotta kind of go back and edit some of the old character portraits just to make them fit this style a bit more. But yeah, that's my update for the last couple weeks. Sorry I didn't get too much done. Oh, actually, wait, I almost forgot. One little thing is I finally hint at the mining that will eventually be available in the game with a little boarded up mine entrance at the base of your property, which eventually you'll be able to open, and I'll build in a mine system sort of in the mountains back here that you'll be able to explore and use to get resources you can sell and eventually craft things with. So yeah, that will eventually be making its way into the game, though that's still a fair ways off. I really want to get the town built up and more of the NPCs finished off, and make it so that there's more to do in town. Like when you actually go and sit in the theater, have an actual show play for you. Right now, when you sit in the theater, just nothing happens. Belle will be standing on stage and won't do anything. So I have to add that in, and then some more stuff to do around town, a lake, all sorts of stuff. But yeah, so that's my actual end of the update. Thank you for watching. If you did, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back in a couple weeks with another update. Feel free to support me on my Patreon if you feel so inclined.